Welcome back to Arsenal Pass Time of the Round, episode 15. Today we're joined by Zach Bunn. Zach is the CEO of Team Covenant, an organization we owe a lot to as Flesh and Blood players. I spoke last episode about content creators like Hayden and I standing on the shoulders of giants, and Team Covenant is undoubtedly one of the creators I was alluding to. I've had the pleasure of meeting Zach a few times over the past few months. He is a fellow competitive player, content creator, and friend. Anyway, Zach, thank you for joining us, and how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you guys so much for having me. Some very nice things you said about us in that intro, but both Steven and I have been very much, and a bunch of people on the team, enjoying the content you guys produce. You really are doing a huge service to the community, and it's great to see. I think for a long time, we've been creating content for a while, Covenant, and the community-driven content is some of the most important additions to a lot of these games and communities, and a lot of times I'll describe it as like the heartbeat of a lot of these communities. So you guys are doing a great job, and appreciate being able to be here, and just excited to talk about Flesh and Blood.
Yeah, super excited to have you on. And I know we've talked a little bit, but let's just jump right into with kind of Team Covenant yourself. I know that the story is a bit long, but in the most digestible, kind of abbreviated way, let's talk a bit about like the history of Team Covenant and specifically how you guys transitioned into Flesh and Blood. And also, of course, Steven yourself. I know you are very big fans and play the game a lot. So just tell me a little bit about your personal journeys as well.
Yeah, so I'll try to condense this as much as possible. We do have an about page on the website that goes into this, and we talk about it. I think we did a summary podcast back at like the end of 2018 or 2019, where we kind of took an hour just to really go into the history. But short version, grew up playing tabletop games together, Steven and I. That's really how we met and became friends. And we're from a really small town, a couple thousand people, one stoplight, didn't have a game store. Yeah, that's definitely small. Didn't have a game store, but my uncle had a movie rental business like he did in the 90s and 90s, early 2000s. And started playing these games, and I started hosting events out of the back of his movie store. And then Steve went off to college. He was a year ahead of me. And then I went to college the next year. But moved to Tulsa to go to school. And Tulsa is the town/city we're in now, a little bit bigger than where we first started. And started going to some events and stuff. And, we'd travel up to Tulsa. It was about an hour away from where we grew up to play in bigger tournaments and stuff together. That was all, just... That was great. Looking back, that's some of my favorite times and memories is preparing for and traveling to these tournaments and playing in these tournaments together. And that's really where it all started. But I had some bad experiences with a few online websites, ordering singles for the game I played. We grew up playing not Magic, basically. So we were a little too young to get in on Magic when it first came out. Pokemon was the game that I started with when it first came out when I was, 8 or 9. And kind of throughout all my teenage years and whatnot, we always played the games that weren't Magic, right? So that was Pokemon and Dragon Ball Z and Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, both the CCG and the TCG, etc. And so a lot of times growing up, we'd go to these tournaments, and our games were always kind of second fiddle. So we'd get kicked off tables because, it was the middle of the Pokemon tournament, but it was time for Magic. So, move along kind of a situation. But when I was in college, had a couple of just lackluster experiences. Stores, with the I could dive into some of these stories for a long time. But anyways, not great experiences. So the nucleus of where we started, which is we're coming up on 15 years, which is crazy to think about all the way back then. But is essentially just this overwhelming feeling, and it was way more true back then than it is now, even though it is somewhat true now. That really, there were a lot of people in the industry that just didn't care. They didn't really care about the games or the communities. A lot of the store owners back then, you just got into it as kind of a hobby. They liked the games that they were playing, whether it was D&D or Magic or whatever. And they saw an opportunity, they opened a store, kind of end of story. And for us, tabletop has always been this incredibly meaningful vehicle. It created a lot of our best friends, created a lot of our favorite memories and a lot of our favorite times in our life. And so we always thought this was like an incredibly important thing. And it just felt like no one really cared that much or treated it like it was super important. And that was particularly true if you weren't playing Magic, right? Like if you were playing Star Wars Destiny, or if you were playing, any number of games that we played throughout our lives, Spoils, Monster Apocalypse, on down the list. It was just tough, so the stores weren't great in general, but then they particularly weren't great if you weren't playing the one game that they cared about. So a lot of where we come from is, trying to offer a community and a way to get these products and somewhere to play, both locally here in Tulsa and online through the services we offer there, to people who love the games that they play, but don't really have anyone around them that shares that, right? And sometimes that means you don't have players around you. Sometimes that means you have stores that don't care. So even when you look at something like our subscription service, which is probably the thing we're most known for at this point, that was really engineered to serve people who didn't have stores that were serving those products to them, right? We started actually with a subscription for LCGs back in 2011, before we even had a physical store. And the recognition was that, like, if you play the Lord of the Rings LCG, just economically, we talk about this a ton on our podcast. Most stores don't have a really good reason to care about that game. Like, you might make $6 or $7 per pack per player once a month. Can't really run tournaments. Economically, fundamentally, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And then when you have Magic right next to it, which might make you thousands of dollars per player per year, you can see why stores care more about Magic and the people that play Magic. So that's really the kind of the underlying nucleus of what we do, and that's spun out in a lot of different ways, and we've evolved over the years. But ultimately, that's where it started. And you talked earlier before we got on the first started recording about being excited about our future. So kind of the driving mission behind what we're doing is ultimately to perfect or to build the perfect place to play these games. So we're still in that pursuit. If you're watching this and you follow us on streams and podcasts and stuff, you know that we're actively working on what we call 3.0 of our store. So we opened our first store in 2012. We moved in 2015 to what we call 2.0. We were ramping up into 3.0 just before the pandemic hit in 2020. So we had to slam on the brakes and take a little bit different of a path. But that's the shortest version of that I think I can give you. That's not like a one sentence answer.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before, and this kind of the future really gets me excited. I know we specifically kind of talked about some details around like what some of the core tenets were in the store's design, and it sounds like it's going to be a good place to play, and I'm really excited. I think it's going to be super successful. Obviously, we've got some very passionate people behind it, but about Flesh and Blood too. I believe that the way you guys got into Flesh and Blood is that you were sent the book, the lore book, and then maybe didn't pay as much attention to it. Picked it up one day, read the book, and they decided to try out the game. You and Steven are both seem to be very invested at this point, both as competitive players and also just as people enjoying what the game is. How did you kind of evolve to that? And like, what about Flesh and Blood really stands out to you? Where you're like, this is something where I want to devote like my time, right? Because there is sometimes stream time, but I know that the way I met Zach was actually at a Road to Nationals in Dallas, and he just drove down there and is grinding his little butt off trying to get his invite, playing Bravo. So how do we go from picking up a game, for a service and then falling in love with it?
Yeah, so kind of interesting. The way we found out about Flesh and Blood is they sent us a box that had like the lore book, and I think it was a box of Welcome to Wraith and the Welcome to Wraith starter decks, and it had a nice, really nice note card from Legend Story Studios. And we've been doing this a while. We started doing YouTube content back in like 2007, 2008. And so over time, right, you do a lot of content and you become, there's a certain number of people around that just are aware of what we do. So we get sent games quite often, right? Games will come in various shapes and sizes and packages and whatnot. So it's not atypical, but early in 2020, that's crazy. My years are all messed up because of the pandemic. But early in 2020, we got that box that had the everything in it. And what stood out to me immediately, you have the nice note card with a handwritten note. That's already a sign, right? Because a lot of times you'll get like a box with like some decks in it or something, and it might be a handwritten note, but usually it might be a typed out note, kind of a thing, or maybe not a note at all. They just sent you an email and sent something off to you, and that's fine. But you could tell like there was a level of care here that was a little different. And then we opened a couple packs just to look at the cards and see what the card quality was like and the art and stuff. And Then I stumbled into that lore book, and I think I have one right here, still sealed,
That's
actually.
so nice.
But you can just tell, right? It's this anything that's like this gold embossed. I don't know what you even call that technique, right? It's like imprinted and it's like a shiny gold where the stuff's at. Um, that's very appealing to me. This doesn't fall down on me. Anyway, so I got that book, started looking through it, and some of that art. I saw that Glint the Quicksilver art in the lore book. Then I saw the Solana art, and then I got to the Aria section. I loved everything about Aria, right? So that was just really impressive to me. So then we decided at the time we were streaming on Mondays, one day a week. And so we basically put it on the schedule to stream it because it was like, we'll check out this game, we'll learn how to play it on stream, and see what it's all about. So then we played it on stream, right? And it was fantastic, right? That's the only way to put it. We got done. I'd already read some of the lore book, and then we were talking about it after, and we were both kind of just like, you want to play again? Ultimately, right? So that's a good sign. But then actually it kicked up a notch because our normal process when we find a game, next stop is actually talk to the publisher. And there's a lot of reasons we want to do that, right? If we're going to invest time and money on promoting and supporting a game and adding it to our ecosystem, right? It's a lot of work. And so we want to make sure that we philosophically align with the publisher. And then we also need to make sure that we're going to have products to sell if we're going to spend time promoting it, right, as a business. And so started talking with Legend Story, ended up talking with James, and just continued to be impressed, right? There were a lot of things he said in that conversation that stuck out to me. Mechanically about the game, I could go on and on about why it's a great system. And system is the key word there. I think it's a incredibly designed system that is really... it gives borders that are really good for the designers to play in, that aren't just creating new wild things that make old stuff obsolete, right? But not even talking about the system, just talking about the company. The name of the game, Flesh and Blood, is about getting people together in the flesh and blood. I talked about our mission being we're trying to build the perfect place to actually play these games. So that aligns really nicely, right? A lot of people see us kind of as a content creator, online retailer kind of a situation, but that's not really the lens that we're looking at even ourselves in, right? That's currently some of the stuff that's going on, but that's not why we're here. And things like being committed to sending most of the product to local retailers, and just recognition of what they were trying to accomplish and how they were trying to accomplish it. Interestingly, I was having that conversation like a couple weeks into the pandemic, right? Which is a crazy time for everybody, us and Legend Story particularly. And so it was just kind of a moment where I could tell you had these people that had been working on something for a very long time. They had been building momentum. They ran straight into a pandemic. And they just cared a lot, and this game was really good and it was really interesting. So it just made a lot of sense for us. We were really excited. It was really natural for us to want to support it and be on board. And then, we decided to start doing content and supporting the game in the middle of a pandemic where really no one was sure how anything was going to work out. And looking back the past year and a half, it's crazy what's happened for that game particularly. But that was kind of I think the key things that happened to kind of push us in that direction. Great game, followed by impressive publisher, and just throughout the whole process, showing a ton of care.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh, Hayden, sorry, I'm not going to interrupt you again. I was going to say I did interrupt you before, so I'm gonna let you ask your question. Here we go.
No, I'm just curious at the back of that. Obviously you spoke about the LSS as a publisher and the conversations you've had with James, but Zach, you've seen a lot of TCGs and CCGs and LCGs over your years, right? Come in and some be successful and some for periods of time, others not so much. Is there something about Flesh and Blood, outside of what you just spoke about, that you think means that it's going to have long-term success, if you think that at all?
I happen to think that, yes. And there's a lot of reasons, right? It ties in some of the stuff I said. One is the design of the game system. I've never seen a game, honestly, in all of the games we play, and we play a lot of the old games on Thursdays on the stream. We do Throwback Thursdays to all sorts of games. And the system of the game is so good because, and a good example of this is, I think it's Barraging Beatdown from the first set from Welcome to Wraith. It's basically the exact same card as one of the Earth cards we got in this Tales of Aria set. And the only thing different is that it's an Earth card versus not an Earth card, right? It's a generic that can happen. And you see essentially all these little levers, and it's the fundamental of most attack cards, right? Have a cost, have a pitch value, they have a defense value, and they have an attack value, and they have a card text. So from a game development standpoint, there are so many levers that you can pull that it's going to be. I've seen so many games where they have to do big crazy things every year just to like keep it interesting. But it feels like they could change one little stat and it's suddenly a whole different card, and it keeps it really interesting for a long time. You pair that with their kind of vision for the game itself, which it seems like they, talking about the 8 talents and having years of cards developed up front, seems like they've really laid the groundwork to not run into, common development problems quickly. It may happen eventually. You just get to a point where you've kind of fully explored mechanics that you set out, but I think it's going to be a long time, honestly, before that happens. And then you just look at their general behavior as a publisher, right? That was probably beyond the game. That was the most notable piece of the early conversations. And when I say impressive, it's a lot of little things, right? It's the fact that you're in the middle of a pandemic, sales are basically none, and you're deciding to hit print on the next set anyway to make sure that you don't have a big delay between sets, right? Having the foresight to have the resources to do that, having the conviction in what you're doing to go ahead and hit print at that moment. Because I'll be honest, right? Pandemic hits for us. Yeah, we're about to launch into a whole new 3.0 store zone, right? And I'm immediately like weekend 1 is like I'm running the math. How long can we last if revenue is totally shot, right? How long can I keep paying people? How long can I keep paying rent? And so I think most publishers are probably, when they're publishing a new game, especially if it's their first game, that game needs to be successful. It needs to be successful pretty quickly. Otherwise, that game goes away. That's why a lot of those 90 CCGs disappeared. Beyond the fact that there were a million CCGs, is they probably didn't have the ability to last 4 years, right? To get to the point where you're actually sustainable, whatever that ends up looking like. So all the way to just even the recent bannings, right, with Duskblade and Seeds of Agony, compared to Fantasy Flight Games' handling of like Destiny, which is their most recent collectible game. The fact that they're communicating that before a set comes out, they're being honest about it, right? That, hey, we made a mistake and here's what happened. And that they're addressing it immediately instead of letting it linger in the meta, right? Or just let Chain rotate out, right? They could have allowed the rest of the calling season, rest of the year to kind of play out. Chain probably rotates out. So like, how big of a deal is it to ban Seeds of Agony at that point? Or even Duskblade? Like, we'll just let the Runeblades all rotate out. We'll lower their power level. Things will be fine. So there's just that continued thread of it's care. Honestly, like when I go back to the early Covenant story, right? It's not just caring. It's also understanding, right, what it is to be a player of this game. And they weren't willing to let 4 or 5 months of the game keep being this experience because they thought there was a better experience they could offer. And so you just see those little signs, right? And it's clear they care, and you build all this on top of each other. You then throw in, as it happens, the kind of CCG being on fire right now, right? That element of the market. And I say this a lot, actually. It's a kind of a comparable situation for me, but like when I think about a calling or world championship for FAB, if you want to win, I think you have to be incredible at the game. I think you have to be incredibly prepared for that particular meta, whatever that is. And I also think you have to get a little bit lucky, right? You need the right pairing. You need the right card to flip when you're drawing. You're drawing off the top of your deck, and you just need the right cards to hit. At some point in the tournament, right? You're playing 15, 16 rounds against players that are all really good. Something's got to bounce your way. So Legend Story situation, I think, is similar, right? I think they prepared for years. I think they were prepared for any situation to come their way. They're prepared for the pandemic to hit. They had the resources to weather that storm and the plan to do it. And then they're also prepared for success, right? And some things definitely bounced their way, but I feel like they were prepared to be successful.
That's a good way to put it. There's like a key word that you say, which is honesty, and I think that's like one of the most important things and most prominent things that Legendary Studio sort of emulates that I feel as a player. Is I feel like all the decisions they make for the game are genuinely what they believe is good for the game. Because, like you say, when we talk about change, like it looked like Living Legend was actually changed around at a perfect time for change to kind of just rotate out after domination. But then we look at potentially a very oppressive kind of series of callings and then nationals where chain might be very dominant, and they took kind of this is definitely the harder path, like definitely the riskier path to go ahead and ban scenes or ban. Yeah, because like it genuinely, like, if especially when we're looking, like, say this is the explosion of FAB, right? We had our proof of concept, we had our Vegas, we had that, and now we have an influx of new players, and the first thing these new players see is something like this. It's definitely, there's a non-zero part of it that is not good for the game, but they genuinely believe that this is going to lead to a better game, a better format, and increase our player experience. So while the method what may have been a bit jarring, I think as a player I'm impressed and I want to kind of like follow them more. Like I think it was actually kind of an incredible decision.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy? And I think, it could have been a moment. 99.9% of other publishers, just based on my experience, would have handled that moment so differently. Even the reality that they already had the Living Legend thing built in. I think that's a clever thing that they did, right? Non-rotation. I think that's genius. Most publishers wouldn't have done that, right? Because they wouldn't understand how to handle that, why rotation can be problematic, et cetera. But they already built that in. So like they had a solution, and it could have been, hey, we'll just let this play out, rotate out, and then we can say, look how smart we are. Like when things are a little too good, they go away and it's not a problem, right? And instead they were very proactive about it. So it just feels like they understand what it's like to be a player and what it's like to actually experience this game, which is not not altogether common when it comes to publishers and tabletop, honestly.
Yeah, whenever someone talks about Flesh and Blood and what LSS do well, I think you can sum it up. What I like to sum it up is they are players who have built a game for players, and they're introspective enough that when they make decisions, they think about those decisions as a player, not just as a business at the end of the day, which is just fantastic for, I think, I guess the growth of the game, and why, me and Brendan have actually talked about this a lot recently around like the seeds banning and things like that we feel optimistic about, even though, this has happened, the game's life looks good beyond this, which is great. And we're actually going to walk into a national season, right? Or a calling season, which you're both going to be playing in some of those. That looks really healthy, whether it be the PTIs, whether it be nationals. And I think that's really exciting.
Definitely. Yeah, I think, it just opens things up. Even in our testing, right, for Vegas, it was so defined by chain, honestly. It just started being it. In my mind, it's like I have 6 or 7 turns, and any card or any deck that can't get it done in 6 or 7 turns goes out the window. And that's fine. That's a fine time frame to go through in this game. But it makes me super excited, like for the national championship, especially. You have in the first U.S. national championship, it'll probably be the biggest event. That weekend will probably be a giant event for Flesh and Blood. And the healthier that meta looks at that point, I think the better for the game. Yeah. And I'm excited to see what spins out.
It's super exciting, especially from, kind of a competitor standpoint. The meta's cracked wide open, and, there is no real dominant strategy at this point. That's amazing. But there's one thing that you said that I think is absolutely true, right? And that's, you said that Flesh and Blood is kind of built to succeed, or the way I've usually phrased it is built for scale, which is, I look at, there's like, this happens only a few times kind of, I think, throughout life, is that you'll look at something and it'll look like genius. It looks like something that's just, you can't believe how it was engineered so perfectly. Like maybe it's that perfect book, something like that. When I look at Legend Story, I look at Flesh and Blood, that's honestly the way I feel. I mean, every time I think that the design space has been pushed, whether it's, I used to think, okay, we can't keep getting 4 heroes, then we have talents, and we have this, and all the power levels exist on this line, this like equation, and it always comes in so well. And then when we do have a problem, like we did with Chain, it is handled correctly, and it's amazing. Just I think from a business and company perspective, the way that they've executed Flesh and Blood. I know that it was designed, quite in advance before release. The way that it's been executed and just kind of this what looks to be organic growth from like the outside in is just so impressive. Like you have to think this game is actually like it didn't release too long ago. We had COVID, which is probably one of the most disruptive things to ever happen to a lot of industries. And then Flesh and Blood is flourishing. It's about to probably be one of the biggest competitive games in the United States and then maybe the world within a year or two. And it's just incredible that James White and Incorporated, I don't know who was kind of there from the very beginning, was able to execute this. And this was the feeling I got when I went to the 2019 calling, the one where they put up $10,000 and less than 40 people showed up and they had to cancel their venue and do it in a game store. I went to like Subway with James, and then to hear his passion and his, just absolute preparedness to everything about Flesh and Blood. That's when I bought in. That's when I sold all of my Magic cards. And I went to Reaper Game Store, bought in, and then I was sold. This was the game that I was going to play, and it honestly looks like a work of genius to me.
And I think there's a ton of comparables to people getting ready for tournaments, right? And it's just that when you're talking to someone who is very well prepared for a tournament and understands, right, and put the work in and had the team around them to be successful. It's different than someone that's kind of just flying by the seat of their pants and like, I had this idea and I put this game out and like, here we are, right? I'll see if it's successful. And I think it's just a difference between being prepared and reacting, right? Proactive versus reactive. And nothing about what they're doing. We had James on the podcast almost a year ago now, after the kind of like surge for FAB really happened for the first time. And I asked him, like, does the success you've been seeing change anything for you guys, right? Like, obviously, like you couldn't have predicted it would be this successful this quickly, especially during the pandemic. But what does that change? And he was like, it doesn't change anything. It just speeds it up. So that was such a revealing answer to me, because it was like, oh my gosh, like we were expecting to win.
Yep.
Right? When you talk to players that are really good at a game, it's that same vibe, right? It's like someone will be like, oh yeah, but I got you down to 6. And then in your mind, you're sitting there thinking like, no, I had you beat 8 turns ago. You just didn't see it, right? It's like in chess, if someone's like, I got you down to 3 pieces. And it's like, yeah, but I knew I had you in checkmate 15 moves ago, right? It's how that felt.
Yeah, that's such an exciting, like you say, like a player building a game for players and being like of this mindset of like so determined to succeed. And obviously the three of us all feel very optimistic about the game. But Zach, I wanted to jump back and ask about something that you said earlier, which is, your testing group. Obviously you've taken the step from, playing this game on stream and being a proponent of this game to actually playing this game competitively. And Brendan said before, you traveled to some road to nationals. So how did you and Stephen take that step to decide to want to play this game competitively and in the end go to Vegas? And I assume that you're going to be going to a few more callings as well.
Yeah. So I'm fortunate enough that I'm going to go to all 4 of the callings this year in the U.S. So I'm super excited about that. So we like I said, we grew up playing these games. We grew up as a team, traveling to events and competing and that whole thing. So it's an old hat for us. It's just been a minute since this many. One of the unique parts of Flesh and Blood for me as well is it's the theme and the way it plays and the way it looks is appealing to people from a lot of different backgrounds. And for me particularly, that means that because I played a ton of different games, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are people I know from so many different games playing this one game. It's wild, right? I have friends that I made from Destiny, from Game of Thrones, from Star Wars X-Wing, from Star Wars LCG, from Monster Apocalypse, from Spoil. Like it's just like crazy. So it's really cool because I have a lot of friends that there's crossover. There's not a lot of crossover between because they didn't play the same games. But in Flesh and Blood, that's a little different. So, let's just say, we're playing the game on stream. Pandemic's happening. You can't really compete at the game at that point. Neither Steve and I are big. I wouldn't say proponents. I'm fine with it, but we just don't enjoy playing like via TTS or any of the online modes. We're into tabletop games, so we like hanging out in person and playing games, right? And so during the pandemic and whatnot, it's just like there was no reason to be hyper competitive about it. We were just enjoying the game and exploring the world and doing a lot of sealed and blitz and slowly making our way to constructed. But in my mind, right, it was like, this is a game I could take very seriously at some point if I want to flip that switch. And so we started playing Classic Constructed in January on stream. That we were doing blitz and sealed all the way up to that point. And after about a month of Constructed, it was just like, my goodness, right? This game is phenomenal. It's got all the goods. We started talking about sideboards and like, it was just like, and 40 health is so much different than 20 health. It's unbelievable. So that happened. And then, tournaments started happening. So starting to feel that itch, coming along. It's like, and then they announced the Calling series, right? And we'd already been taking it more seriously at that point. We were playing more. We were talking more about it. We were building decks. We were playing on the side more. But then the Callings got announced and the Road to National season. Then we just totally flipped the switch, right? At least that's when I flipped the switch. So I signed up for the Callings. Originally, I didn't sign up for Cincinnati. And that's when it was basically like, I sent out the Ravens, so to speak, to all my closer card game friends that were playing. I was like, look, pretty much every Saturday, my house, be there. We're going to test. We're going to jam. We're going to go. Of course, the Saturdays we're going to events and stuff don't count, whatever that ends up looking like. So started preparing, started playing. Steven wasn't playing in any of the Road to Nationals. He had stuff going on the weekends we were going to those events. So I went to I was prepping for and played in that first Road to Nationals, and I was playing Bravo, who I'm a big proponent of. And I went 4-2, had a great day. I bubbled out. I think I was like 10th place or something. But that was my first event since before the pandemic. And, it was 60 plus people, sold out event, full room of people competing in a game. And literally the game I was competitive before this was Destiny. And the last we were planning to prep for and go to the World Championship in May of 2020. And then that got canceled, of course. So it was just a very natural, kind of had a nice break from Destiny and competitive in general. And then it was just time. So I went to the event and got hooked again, right? Got home from that event and I was like, all right, you don't know. This game seems way bigger. There's way more prizes on the line. There are really good people that play this game a lot more than I do. And so you just don't know where you're at, right? So it could be that I show up, I go 2-4, and I'm just not even close. But I could feel both games I lost. I felt like I lost because I made mistakes, and I knew what those mistakes were. So that's a very tantalizing thing. It's like, I need to try that again because I think I can get closer. So then the next weekend it was in Edmond, and I went 4-2 again. I just lost later, so I actually made it into the cut. And my last round loss was against Dash playing Bravo, so I didn't even feel bad about that one. And that's the tournament I played Brendan at. That was a great
on me
game.
in Swiss. Gave me that early loss. I squeaked in at 8th somehow because Zach did so well. It's the only reason I got in was because you did well.
That's true. You're welcome for that. So then I made top 8, and then I had this just heater of a game against a Prism player, and I got so close. I felt like I had the game for like 5 turns in a row, and I just couldn't quite win. Classic Prism situation, right? But he was on his last 4 cards of his deck, and he was finally able to poke 1 damage through to kill me. And then I'm just like super in, right? It's like, I know I'm good enough. I know I'm close. Let's go. Now I'm fully in. But then for Steven, it was kind of funny because he was coming to the practice sessions and we're playing on stream. We're talking about it a lot. He was playing Azalea. He has that, hope and a dream to make something that shouldn't be any good work. And we were testing, and it was going well. Like he was against Chain and Katsu particularly, he was doing quite well. So he felt well positioned. But then we played in the Calling in Vegas, and that night it was really funny because we got back to the hotel room, and I think he lost his first game, and the player he lost to ended up going top 8. I forget who it was, but I remember they went top 8. And actually, he felt like he should have won that game. He made the mistake you shouldn't make, which is he forgot to Snapdragons as a reaction.
I lost the Calling like that, yeah.
Yeah,
That's a rough play to make.
he had apparently the like a pumped Red in the Ledger ready to go against who I think it was a chain player, and like they were getting on low health, and then just that turned the whole game around, of course, and he never came back. All that to say, we got in the room that night, and I think that loss and forgetting to hit that reaction is really took him to a new place. It took him where I got after that first road to nationals, where he was just like, he was sitting there looking out the window, and he was like, I think I want to be really good at this game. Like really good. So then since then it's been on a different level as well of like, it's really helpful to have other people around. My brother Tim is another person who's as committed, right? So having a handful of people around who are very committed to not just, go win a tournament or something, but like want to be phenomenal at this game. That the pursuit of being phenomenal at the game is really the driver there.
Yeah,
I think hopefully that answers the question.
It definitely does. One of my favorite moments actually so far in the entirety of this game was when we played that private sealed. We went over to your hotel room, and Steven was there, your brother was there. I remember Dante and I went, and we were talking about kind of pitch tracking and pitching mindfully and remembering your pitch. And usually when anybody brings up the subject of pitch tracking, it's like, yeah, keep it really rough, just like understand you need to have like a power level in your deck. I remember seeing Steven he was just very locked in listening, and he played against Dante. And this guy he's a savage pitch tracker, perfect remembering pitching these, game ending hands. I beat Dante like 3 times in a row. I watched him on stream yesterday, and Steven is a savage limited player now. That he is really good at pitch tracking. He's really, really good.
Well, and that revelation came at the right moment. That was the night he was like, I think I want to be really good at this game, right? And then you're over there and you're like, yeah, you're like, I'm tracking what they're pitching the whole time, and he's just like, wait a second, I can be that good, right? And then immediately the next day he was playing that ProQuest with Levia, and he had 3 or 4 games he won where he was like, I knew they had 2 cards they couldn't block in their hand. And
the opponent said, I got unlucky. And Steve was like, no.
Yeah. He's like, no. And Steven had, he had the Brocade, and then he'd put a red Ghostly Visit in his pit or his Banish Zone.
Mm-hmm.
And literally, I think he won 3 of his games that day, knowing what his opponent could block with, and then just surprise Brocade, right? It's like Brocade into a Ghostly Visit from Banish Zone.
Yeah, that's awesome to see that. I was even more impressed when I watched him play Briar on stream the other day, and like just watched him because like it was so close to fatigue, and he had just pitched a perfect end game, and it was just unblockable, and I was just like, man, proud to see that.
I love seeing that. It's one of my favorite things about Limited is like the ability to get to your second cycle and have these really like interactive games that look, on the surface of it could look one way and then just be completely a different way depending on which player knows what's more information effectively, which is really cool. Zach, I was
gonna say it really points to one of my other favorite parts about FAB is that I'm a year and a half in and I still feel like I'm learning a ton all the time, which is crazy. Usually a year and a half in, I feel like I'm 98% of what I could be at that point.
Yeah, massive agree. I feel like every testing section that we have, still learning so much, whether it's about heroes, whether it's about just interactions of mechanics, or even just like play styles. Even going back now with Tales of Aria coming into Classic Constructed, playing first lot of Classic Constructed games last week, I feel like I'm playing the early days of Flesh and Blood in some ways again. Some of these tactics and these skills that have been a bit dormant over the Monarch season are coming back again, and having to relearn some of those things, which is awesome.
Especially with Chain potentially slowing down, right? The game lasting more than 6 or 7 turns on average changes everything. Your fundamental valuation of most cards is a little off at this point.
Yes, that's definitely what we're most excited for. I think I was when Monarch, when the meta kind of started to develop, at least in our testing group, I found it a bit frustrating because of that. It was a lot of reliance on second cycle of the deck, and some just some more advanced copies of Flesh and Blood seemed to be less relevant. And not only ice, but also chain being kind of being removed as well is going to significantly change the landscape of Classic Construction. I think absolutely for the better. So I'm very excited. But speaking of Classic Constructed, Zach actually played Viscerai at Vegas.
I sure did.
Yeah, you heard him say he played Bravo Road to Nats. So this one was the spice that I think it was a little secret deck of yours that you brought. So tell me a little bit about that. What drew you to it? You thought it, did you think it was well positioned and all that good stuff?
Yeah, well, I played it, so I definitely thought it was well positioned.
Yeah.
So I've been playing Viscera and Bravo since early on, and I was drawn to both those characters early, and I think the unifying theme of both characters that I really love is I call it their Hail Mary potential, which is they can just do these massive plays, right? Like the big turns from Viscera can just be insane value, and it's because the rune chants are also like an economic engine a lot of the times, and he's obviously got the Skeleton, and now he's got Sonata, so he can just kind of do some crazy stuff. But Bravo is pretty similar in that he can send a 9 damage dominate attack with a pummel, or he can send a 15 damage attack, or there's all kinds of weird stuff he can do. And so when we were testing, though, like I said earlier, it kind of became the game of can you win in 6 or 7 turns. Period. Pure aggro Katsu can also win in 6 or 7 turns, which is why he's so good. He can also sideboard into less aggro in the right matchups if he wants to. So I think that's why Katsu was so good in that meta as well. Although, what was the high? Do you guys know what the highest placing Katsu player was?
Top 16. There was one in the top 16. I think it might have been 10th. They were on stream, I think, in the last 2 rounds on a quite aggressive Katsu deck. But not a good day for Katsu.
Yeah, no, I didn't really think about it till after how many Katsus didn't make it anywhere near, the top 8. But anyways, game is fast, and so looking at Bravo, I think Bravo's really reliable. I think he'll constantly, now that he's got the shield, which I love, by the way. I just love that shield. I think he'll constantly be like a safety net for me. He's very good. He's very consistent. When you're playing against people that aren't as good as you, you can win like 99% of the time, regardless of what hero they're on. That's how I feel about Bravo. Like it just doesn't go wrong, I guess is the point. Unlike we were talking yesterday on stream about Ranger. It's like Ranger gives you 100 ways to lose. It gives you some cool ways to win, but also like you just have opportunities to lose. But Bravo rarely feels that way. I can always block and I can always swing the hammer. It's very simple. But particularly going into Vegas, I didn't ever feel good about the dash match, ever. Not even close to good, right? It's like that's almost an auto loss for me. And then I also, after losing to Prism in the top 8 in Edmond, we were testing his Prism, and all of us were kind of just scratching our head. Like, I don't know. I don't know. None of us switched to it because we're dumb, I guess. But it was just like all of our decks, all of our testing, it was like, man, even when we start sideboarding in like 10 cards, never felt great against Prism. And we obviously got better with Prism as we tested. And so it was just like, man, this is tough. And especially if you don't know what you're doing, it's very bad. So that's when I ended up switching to Viscera, because while I felt like his statistical win rate against the entire meta, even the top 5 decks, let's just say that, was maybe a little lower on average, 2 things that I felt really good about were his ability to win against Dash and Prism was higher, right? It wasn't an auto loss by any stretch of the imagination. And then secondarily, when my opponent is playing against Viscera, especially the way I had it built for the first time, I think my odds are like 30% higher to win, right? Like it's just like when you play me 10 times in a row, by like game 10, we're at the actual odds of this match. But like my early games in all of our testing, no matter, even if someone had seen my deck before, the first couple of times they were playing against my deck with any given deck, they were just losing most of the time. So I felt pretty good about that. And my thinking ultimately panned out. My round 1 opponent was Dash. And literally I was like, I don't care if you beat me or not, but you've literally validated my decision not to play Bravo. Because I think I would have lost this game definitely. I ended up losing the game anyway, which is funny. But I definitely think I would have lost that game if I had been on Bravo. So it didn't really matter. And then ironically, or not even ironically, unfortunately, I guess, out of my 7 rounds, I played 1 Katsu and 0 Chain.
Yep. That is
Classic.
something that happened a lot. There's a lot of people who played all chains, a lot of people played no chains, and then crazy distributions throughout in between that.
Yeah, big events tend to do that, which is actually some of the discussions we had in testing about being prepared for anything, because you literally could play against against anything. I was just gonna say as well, like,
Us like a friend, eh?
yeah, you can, and you can't underestimate the power of like the unknown. To your point about Viscera, right? Like, you come in with a hero, you flip it up, your opponent doesn't know first of all what you're even going to be doing, whether you're like on an OTK strategy, whether you're on a like an aggressive strategy. They've got a sideboard to try and work that out, and then you play the game. They don't even know what you're doing half the time. They just got to try and enact a game plan. So you get such big edges to your point, right?
I actually, so I ended up losing my first game, winning 5 in a row, and then had a draw against Dash in the last round.
Mhm.
And after the game was over, he was like, "Man, that was crazy." He's like, "I totally sideboarded thinking you were on OTK completely." And I wasn't on OTK. I didn't really even talk about my deck, but essentially I was trying to build a Viscera deck that could win in 5 or 6 turns if my opponent didn't want to block. So Chain or Aggro Katsu, a lot of time they don't want to block. Then in longer form games against like Bravo or Prism, I had the ability to kind of flex into a mid-range OTK-ish, right? It's not as strong. I wasn't running a lot of the filtering and just like a lot of the stuff that you would see in a traditional OTK situation. But Prism, you have to bring enough heat in a single turn that she can't just cover it up. That was something I kept running into in testing, was like, I would get Prism down to 1, I would be at 20 health as Viscera, and then I could never win the game. Because like, I would just keep putting enough pressure on where they could cover it up. And if I didn't put any pressure on, they would just beat me, right? One or the other would eventually happen. So trying to strike that balance between fast enough to beat Chain, but also I can, because at any point, ultimately, you can just play Fundamentals FAB, which is I'll just start blocking with most of my hand, and then I'll gain any number of rune chance that I can, and I'll keep doing that until I have 22 rune chance, and I can pop my Skeleton and play my Sonata and hope to YOLO you right off the board, right? And being able to, I think that's why in most of my games that I won, at various moments, right, you can make it look like, even early, look like you're doing OTK. And so they start playing a certain way, and then you just stop doing that. And then all of a sudden they haven't been setting up for that condition in the game, right? So there are definitely some head games I can play with Viscera. I also just really, he's a hero I enjoy the most. So I don't know what kind of math it is, but it's non-linear, and it's fun math for me to calculate. Obviously, he has cards that can play any card from your deck, and he has cards that can get any attack from your discard pile. And he's got Rune Chance, which make big things not cost you anything, and he's got the ability to play, non-attacks as instants with Rattlebones and all kinds of bizarre timing stuff. So he's also a hero. That's why I think people playing against him with a deck for the first time can just lose, because there's a lot of moments where you're not sure if this is when you should be blocking the arcane damage or not. I'm looking at my hand. It's like, well, if they take an arcane damage, I go down this route, and it's really bad for them. And if they don't, I go down this other route, and that's okay too. But like, it's just hard for them to know. It's not just like, should I block this or not? You can't just look at it and say, this card will produce 4 damage if I play it on offense, or block for 3 if I block now. Which one's more important? It's more deceptive than that.
Yeah, Viscera's hard to play. I played Viscera in my first local, first Armory event with Tales of Aria the other day, and I had a ton of fun, but also a bit of a headache. So.
Yeah, it's like the Briar math on steroids.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to kind of transition to like a final question. Is that Chain is maybe gone, but I think the door for Viscera has really been cracked wide open, if it was not already open before, mind you. Because you got some significant upgrades in that deck, and it seems to be better positioned than it was, in my opinion. So what are, I know since both Hayden and yourself, Zach, are big Viscera fans, what are you thinking for Tales of Aria in regards to Viscera? Is it something you're looking at? And kind of specifically, what cards are getting you excited right now?
Yeah, I'm definitely looking at Viscera. So the thing about it is, what are we at? We're at the end of September. So it's like 5 weeks till Nationals, right? / Orlando. And in that time, 2 of my weekends I'm going to a calling. And the callings themselves are sealed with a top 8 draft. And then even at the national championship, I'm curious. I thought I had no chance at all to qualify, honestly. But then based on some spreadsheet I saw floating around the other day, whatever saint put that together, it's maybe possible that I qualify at this point. So we'll see if it matters or not. But the reason I mention that is there's 6 rounds out of 16 that are draft for Arya, which is a whole different ball game. That's a whole different format than constructed or even sealed, honestly. And so I'm looking at 5 weeks of time where there are multiple sealed events I'm playing in. They're legitimate events. There is potentially a constructed draft event that's a legitimate event. Even if I don't make that, I'm going to Orlando, so there's a constructed event there that I would play in. There's a lot to get ready for, right? There's a whole lot on the plate. So because of all that, I would naturally be looking at Bravo and Viscera, both of which I think got better. Bravo getting the one-handed hammer and the shield is really critical for that dash match. And then I think both of them also get better because Chain's not around, right? Or at least if he is around, it's just a different ball game. I think he's going to be a little slower. And so, like, both of those decks I'm really comfortable with. Both those decks are, I think, well positioned for this meta. Because even if Ice becomes a big deal, I'm not convinced that it will. But even if it is a big deal, Bravo oftentimes has extra resources around. It's not going to totally mess up his turns to have to pay a couple extra. And Viscera, classic Viscera math, reductions get applied after cost increases. So he has a bunch of attacks that are, -8 because you have 8 rune chance and only cost 3. And then it's like, oh, those ice tokens don't matter at all. Like, okay, I guess I'll play this free card for free still. But all that to say, I think they're both well positioned. I love playing both characters. I'm experienced with both characters. Both got massive upgrades. And for Viscera particularly, those Spellbound Creepers.
Oof.
Just the heat, man.
Scratch
just
that wizard itch, baby. Let's go.
Yeah. I mean, so I was previously on Snapdragon Scalers because I was on a lot of those one-cost attacks. And free go again in a game that's only going to go 6 turns. That's a great piece of equipment to be on. And this is basically that on a whole new level because being able to play at instant speed on attacks that have go again to give you those free action points, and then you might get to do it a couple times, right? It's crazy. It's actually, I saw that card. So the first thing I saw was Duskblade. I thought, man, this is my deck but better. Like, it's just going to be easier. Then it got banned, so strikes and gutters. But yeah, the Spellbound Creepers are the main thing for me, and then even the Rosetta Thorn, the sword. I think in matches where my opponent's not healing, I was on the Reaping Blade. That's one where they can't heal, right?
Yep.
So that's pretty good against Bravo and Bolton. Ish, and maybe Prism if they're going super defensive-y, so it'll probably stay in my sideboard. But that Rosetta Thorn 2 and 2, my deck is already playing non-attacks and attacks. It just fits right in there. So very excited about Viscera. The generic Runeblade cards, I don't know the name of it, but the 0 cost Majestic that all your attacks gain. Yeah, that's it. Definitely gonna be looking at that, right? It's blue. It's a 0 cost non-attack action. We like the stock. It also naturally, like, Meet and Greet's one of my favorite cards, so that potentially is just making that even easier when you don't have rune chance. Non-attack Meet and Greet, they still have to cover up at least the arcane damage if they don't want you to have go again. So anyway, those are definitely the standouts. The attack is fine. I don't know that I'll end up playing it. Constructed, the 1 arcane damage off of Singeing Blade is not super tantalizing, but it's fine. It's a fine attack.
Yep.
What about you? What are you looking at with Viscera over there, Hayden?
Do you know what? All you're talking about, Zach, here, I agree with so much of it. It sounds like we're on very similar pages, to be honest. Spellbound Creepers, I think, is like a massive, massive upgrade for the way that Viscera can and wants to be able to adapt its play. It's funny, like, Spellbound Creepers, you read that card and you go, oh, if I don't get like multiple uses out of this, like, is this card actually that good? Yes, it is. It has so much utility. Like, that effect has so much utility that generally you can get 1 use out of it plus a block, or multiple uses out of it, depending on how your deck's built. So I think that card's huge. Yeah, I mean, I also agree on Rosetta Thorn as well. So I think, Brendan, we're going to have to play this list that I've been playing this week and on camera next week, get some games in with it, because it's a super fun list. And I think that the Viscera is just well positioned in general. So yeah, excited about it.
First deck I'm going to sleeve, and it takes a lot for me to sleeve a deck.
It's true. I have to twist
I
his
hate
arm.
sleeving decks. Can't do it.
you guys are fellow members of the secret Runeblade Society, so it would make sense that if you can't play Chain, you might pivot over to his friend Viscera. I'm excited to see what you guys come up with. I'll definitely watch that stream, and just I think the new set coming out does this, but also Chain kind of going away. He was the North Star of the meta, so I'm excited to see whatever shows up in that ProQuest in Dallas. Honestly, because that'll really be the first major event where I think people are really bringing the heat. And then we're gonna get to see it play out. And do you guys have any predictions on who you think will win that tournament?
Yeah, we do.
The PTI?
Yeah, so I think Hayden cast his vote as Katsu control.
I definitely didn't.
Was it Saber Bolton then? What was it? No,
I said.
Yeah, who do you think actually is going to take it?
Actually, I think probably Bravo or Dash have the best possible chances of taking out like a week 1 or week 2 event. I think the lists are going to be like tuned. People probably aren't going to be as focused on the PTI because they're probably focused on getting some sealed games in. So I think lists that are already existing and probably doing pretty well are in a good position. But if not that, I do think that Viscera would have a pretty good chance, or Prism would be the next 2. But those are my kind of 2 tiers, I think, of the top 4 heroes.
Mm-hmm. I like nods. You mentioned Dash. So I've heard people, holding services and whatnot for the passing of Dash. You think she still got the goods?
Yeah, so it's all about theory, right? So like Rampart is just perfect theory versus Dash, but Dash might be able to adjust by playing less of a induction chamber plasma purifier based build, more of like kind of a boost. That could still be quite good, and they would also have the flexibility, which is like a natural thing that Dash does, to slide back into induction chamber plasma into other matchups where it needs it. So it's all about, does the theory hold? And sometimes in Flesh and Blood, the theory doesn't hold. Like Snag is my favorite, obviously my favorite, my favorite example of that. But it looks so good. It looks like absolute hoser, just like finally making this auto loss playable. But Dash is just it's a very adaptive deck. I mean, it has a lot of different strategies, and I think it might be able to get around the shield. I don't know yet. It's total theory, but I don't think it's dead.
Some have compared it to a cockroach. Just won't go away.
Yeah. Seriously, man, Dash. I'm fine with it. It doesn't bother me that it's in the game, but it's definitely, as a Bravo player, like just PTSD from that hero. But I feel similarly about Ice. There's 2 heroes that can play Ice. A lot of people saw that initially and they were like, oh my goodness, the economics of the game are going to completely shift and the game's going to slow down. And I'm looking at it and it's like, I mean, I don't know how many players out of 100 are actually going to bring Old Him or Lexi, right? And even then, it's like, can't you just up your resource curve a little, right? Like, I mean, is your turn really over with 1 or 2 ice tokens, or do you just take a slightly different path? And heroes that can alter, like Bravo is a good example. He has a lot of blues, but you might switch me from swinging a 9 damage Spinal Crush to swinging a 6 damage sword. But like, if you're not bringing the heat outside of that, it's like I'm still blocking for 6 or 9 and swinging the hammer. Like it.
So I think the answer to that question actually changed with the ban. So pre-ban, Ice was going to be, in my opinion, was going to be quite disruptive and very popular because it addressed like the biggest problem in the format, which was Chain. The iteration of Chain that we played, and even that you saw played in top 8 as well, that was different from our deck, would have really struggled into Ice-based decks, most likely. But since that has kind of, I mean, I honestly think that Chain is in a significantly worse spot than he was. So with Chain maybe moving out of the meta, I think that the kind of with what we'd have expected, a lot of people jumping to Ice to immediately kind of combat that. Now that it's going to naturally be gone with the banning, I think that'll be way less relevant. I thought it was going to be extremely relevant because if we look at the last meta, it was really, I mean, we really saw aggro decks, so Chain, Katsu aggro, and then we saw I guess kind of Prism too. So like Old Him Ice, and then Lexi Ice to maybe a lesser extent, like kind of Lexi taxes. Yeah, I mean, it really would have really derailed like aggro Katsu and Chain. So I think less so now, and I do agree with you after the ban. Before that was when I was kind of making the forecast where it's like, yeah, I expect a lot of people to be on Ice because you got to attack the elephant in the room, which was Chain.
I agree.
Brendan, do you have a prediction for who's going to win in Dallas?
Yeah, so it depends who's playing, I think. Early meta, I agree with you. Like I would be on a mid-range deck, and probably a mid-range deck that had been built before, and maybe something. I mean, Hayden's kind of right with the nail on the head with Bravo. Something like that does seem very likely. But if I was playing it, I would need some testing, but I think I might actually land on like a Rhinar or a Levia. Probably Rhinar. So Rhinar is just really well positioned, right? Because it
Yeah,
just
you guys got to play this Levia deck.
we did. Hayden beat me. Hayden beat me. We did. We played it. We played it. Hayden did beat me. He cheated on reload. Game rule violation. No, but it's pretty good. Like it is really good. But Rhinar is just so well positioned. You got to think of like right. So first question you got to answer yourself is if you want to play in this new meta, how do I beat Prism? And you don't just want to beat Prism. You want to slap Prism. You want that to be a buy because it's going to be a lot of your matches, right? So how do I beat Prism? Okay, good. How do I deal with Ice? Probably a mid-range deck. Rhino satisfies that. How do I deal with fatigue and dirtily strategies? It's really popular in like an early meta, especially after we saw a sort of fatigue deck kind of win the calling. If you could call the deck that this strategy will become more popular. So how do you really beat those strategies? Like, well, you have evasion. So intimidate and use barrage and beat them. Oh, that's evasion. Stacking big 5-card hand, blood or spell. So I think Rhinar is incredibly well positioned. But the caveat here is that if Dash can survive by becoming this more boost oriented kind of mid-range aggressive deck and less reliant on the induction chambers and plasma purifiers, that is also not fantastic for Rhinar. But right now I probably would be looking at Rhinar with a first glance, but untested.
He's passionate about it.
Well, you mentioned something that I want to point out too that is also incredible to me about Flesh and Blood, which is I think how many different ways you can play the same hero.
Yep.
I think that's so critical because, like, if you buy into a single character or class, and like maybe OTK Visceray isn't good enough right now, but if you can also play him aggro or mid range, as an example, I really dig that. So same with Dash. I do hope that Shield coming out is not just the end of Dash, for whatever that means. And even then, it's like, let's say Bravo gets twice as popular, and he's 20% of the field. It's like, I don't know. Like, is Dash really that scared? Like, is it an auto loss, or is it just like, am I down to 50-50? Am I down to 30% win chance? Bravo would have to be a significant portion of the field because it's just Bravo and Oldhim that can even run the shield. So then she's still got the same match against everyone else, right? And then the big question is, can she just change how she's playing and still win?
Yeah, kind of like Prism adjusting to the Bravo matchup, which is like, just quickly, if you want to pick up Bravo, like you've got to be able to beat Aura Prism and also like getting, double or triple Tome of Divinity and Aura locked, which is kind of out of your control sometimes as the Bravo player. And that feels pretty bad. So how do you shore up the Prism matchup? It's going to be like 30% of the field or plus. Like, you equipping 2 Titan's Fists and a Time Skippers to smack auras around, or what is it?
Yeah, and honestly, like if the meta hadn't been prepared for such a big shift, I would expect to see a lot of Prism at ProQuest. But 2 things for me. I think with the new set and with Chain kind of going out, I won't be surprised to see a lot of variety. Just because it kind of gives people permission to explore again, right? It's not as defined. It's not as every person you're watching talking about the same things and the super defined way to play the game. The other thing I would say is like Prism is a lot to manage as a player. And so like, I say this a lot, which is you have a 500 person tournament. There's probably only 100 to 150 players at the tournament that can even win that tournament legitimately. Like, in terms of skills at the game. So it really, the question that actually matters is not what percent of that field will be Prism. You want to be able to beat a player. You don't want an auto loss to just someone who's average at the game, right? But like, what are those 150 people playing? And I do think that they are good enough to play Prism quite well, probably. But at the same time, I don't know. That is a character that takes every time I see a Prism player, I can tell they've been using a lot of their brain, right? And it's a long tournament, right? Where the cut to top 8, ProQuest is a little shorter, right? I think it's 6 rounds with the cut to top 8. But it's an interesting. I'm curious the percentage of the overall population, right, and what they're playing, even at the ProQuest, is interesting to me. Then also, even the percentage of like the top 50 players and what they're playing is another kind of signal, which I'll be curious to see what that actually shakes out to be.
So we actually have some hard data on this subject roughly, and that's a sense in regards to Prism. That's that Prism players are actually Prism players. We saw Prism have the worst conversion ratio throughout Road to Nationals, but still show up in good numbers. And that's not me dogging on Prism, which everybody calls me out for. It's just it means that like the people that wanted to play Prism played it no matter what the results were, and eventually that worked out. It won the calling. But it shows that there's something about that hero that people identify with, whether it's the playstyle, the art, or just whatever it is, that deck is going to be popular almost no matter how good or bad it is to a certain extent, which I think that the popularity was far exceeding, kind of what the numbers were showing in Road to National. So I think that now that it has become kind of like the deck to beat, I do expect it actually to be extremely popular at the PTI.
Yeah, well, in that case, I hope there's a ton of Reinar players.
I'll be one of them.
Reinar, show up, please. I need you. No, hopefully we'll just be in day 2 of the.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, you both better be in day 2. That's what I'm hoping for.
Oh yeah, love the X1er, but yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I know they might add some more rounds. Maybe
it's tough. Are they changing the number of rounds?
Maybe. It depends, right? So like, there's a lot that goes into that. It's not just like. Because it's a production thing with Channel Fireball, and there's obviously a schedule, it's probably not as easy as adding them, even though it makes logistical sense with more people. So we'll have to see if they can kind of move that around fast enough. I think that it is overwhelmingly that the feedback is that like, please don't do this again. Please don't make it so you make day 2 and it doesn't matter. And please don't make it so it's X1 or bust on top 8, because that doesn't feel amazing. So I think that it's very likely that they've heard that feedback, and James being a competitive player, and a lot of the people at Legistorius, being professional Magic players and having kind of played these tournaments before, I think that it's extremely likely that system will change, kind of for the better. Because I even when I talk to someone like Dante, someone who profited from that, in a sense, he got 4, like his feedback as well is like, no, like it's not good,
Well, I mean, I think that goes back to what we talked about earlier, right? Which is their actual awareness and understanding of what it is to be a player at these events. And, I mean, you were top 64, Brendan, and decided to drop because you just didn't have a chance.
It was a big mistake, actually, in retrospect, because they changed the ELO. Did you see that announcement where the ELO is now separated with limited and constructed?
Oh.
Yeah.
Why was that a mistake for you then?
So because if my net ELO, because I had played both limited and constructed callings before, probably would have been at greater risk if I had played day 2, because they switched it and all of my limited ELO just went to limited. The constructed event I did play and I went 5-2 in New Zealand. I actually would have probably stood to gain quite a bit by having a positive record, or at least like 3-1 on day 2. So yeah,
but that's still, ultimately, like, it's pretty rough if you go, if you make top 64 and like they're asking you to come back to play another day of the tournament and you don't have a chance to win.
Yeah, and there's a PTI at the same time where it's like the EV is huge.
Yeah. So that's just, I do hope they make that adjustment. But even if they don't make it by Dallas, because that's really soon, I would expect any of that kind of feedback to make it to them and them to listen and care and to try to make it better. Because, even like I ended up going 5-1-1, and then it's like, it feels like a pretty good day. And then you just don't make the cut. You don't come back for day 2, and it's like, Elo's great. I'm feeling pretty good about that, right? Someone posted that the other day, and it was like, oh wow, that's crazy. But yeah, no, it all that said, even with that hiccup, it's crazy how much, at least from the games I played, how much better this organized play everything is. And I'm actually happy they separated out limited and constructed.
So am I. Yeah. Despite the results kind of like not being good for me in the end, like I'm very happy. Like the philosophy behind it is fantastic, right? Like you have players that specialize in limited, and you have players that specialize in constructed, and you've got to be the complete player. Like you see with the dual format at nationals, to be the best player in the world, which is how it should be, in my opinion.
No, I agree. And I also think, like, after the ELO got posted, I didn't realize they'd separated them. And so thinking about Dallas and Cincinnati, it's like, kind of really, you don't want to disincentivize people from playing, right? And part of ELO events is that there is always a risk of playing and that you'll lose. And if you're highly rated in ELO, you'll lose a lot of points to people that aren't, if you lose to someone that is lower ranked than you. But like, given how different limited and constructed are, and even just the reality that like I played against a couple limited pools in Vegas that were just like, man, I don't know. We could have played that 100 times, and I don't know how many of those I would have won. So I'm curious how many rounds Dallas ends up being, how that cut works and whatnot. How many players are playing obviously affects how many people make various days and cuts and all that business. But thinking about, suddenly Elo got posted and now I have something to lose. And it was like, man, if I open up a pool that I'm not happy with, do I just drop immediately? Right.
So you probably still play just in the context of like what you're currently rated, and even when I'm currently rated too. We definitely still play if like, but if you were like 1800 and you opened like, nobody's 1800 yet, but if you open the worst pool ever, that'd be a consideration. But if you are at that ELO rating already, you probably have secured all your invites. You're probably consistent play on the Pro Tour. You've got your Worlds invite. That kind of player cares all less. It's more the player on the cusp. And what's weird about the calling is that because I played in the ones before COVID, my ELO was like 113 points higher than every single person at the event. So that's why it was like this weird disproportion. But in the future, if you are high enough rated to like, essentially care, you'd probably already be on the Pro Tour anyway.
Do we know, have they said how they're using the ELO rating?
Not yet.
You talk like you know how that's going to function.
It's
I would
not
love to know.
Didn't they? So I don't know if I'm still misquoting this, but I believe that they wrote a sentence where they said that Pro Tour invites will go out, partly based on rated ELO.
I haven't seen that, but I have seen that they've said that they will qualify you for national and global level events, which is what they've said for the ELO. So, but nothing more than that right now.
Hayden knows Magic. So Hayden, if in Magic the Gathering, could you qualify the Pro Tour based off?
Yes.
Yeah, you could. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that would make sense, right? Because you want, like, if you'd be chaining Pro Tours over and over. Exactly. And while you're at Pro Tours, you can pick up more PTIs to replace the one you use, so on and so on.
Exactly.
Or like you can keep your ELO rating high enough that you keep getting invited.
For sure. You play against higher rated players at the Pro Tour as well, because they're probably, and it all kind of works out in the end. There are obviously these funky ones where like that first calling, but ultimately the system is really good and they've separated it.
And ELO is a system that works better over time, right? Exactly. It rewards consistency over a long period of time. And I think it makes sense too to have your Pro Tours be gated in a way, because like you're going to a Pro Tour, everyone there probably has a high enough ELO that losing to another player there isn't going to cost you an unbelievable amount of points.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So it makes it where your pro players, once they get there, want to go to Pro Tours, and it's a little riskier to go to something like a calling, which they can still go to, of course. And if you've got the goods, you've got the goods. So you shouldn't be too worried about it because you'll just win most of your games, right? But ultimately, it's like it could also incentivize very highly rated players to stick to the Pro Tour and the World Championship level events, so that they aren't putting that at risk as often. But I'm curious to see how that plays out. I've never been a part of such an elaborate organized play system.
Yeah, I think the way it plays out is that if you are high enough rated, that you would be like you said, it takes time. But if, let's say we're a couple of years down, if you are high enough rated to where it's like, there's massive disparities between you and an average GP player, you're probably so high rated that you have like a plethora of PTIs and you don't care. I would assume, but I'm not 100% sure. I think I'm optimistic.
Me too.
Well, and you don't need to be an optimist if you're really good at the game. You can just go to any event you want and it won't matter that much, right? Like, I think if someone is, and it's like it is in chess at least, it's like if you're at 1900 ELO, you're probably going to win most of your games no matter what's happening. Like,
Sure.
For sure. Them's just the beats.
Yeah, the top tables. Yeah. We'll see. There's obviously more variance in this game than chess, so we'll see what happens. And thankfully, so
yeah, a little bit of Saber Bolton variant. No, I'm kidding. No more Saber Bolton. I won't say it again. Anyway, again, Zach. I want to thank you so much for joining us. We had a great conversation. I know we always do, but it's awesome how we transition from learning more about Team Covenant, learning more about yourself, and then we just kind of degenerate into just talking about the game because we love it. But again, thank you so much. I want to give you a little bit of time to go ahead and plug Team Covenant, plug your stream schedule and your podcast, and then we'll sign off.
Yeah, well, again, thank you guys so much for having me on. It's had a great time. Talking about FAB is not exactly hard thing for me to do. I'm a huge fan of this game, huge fan of the publisher, and love what you guys are doing. So please keep doing it. Also, to all the other content creators out there, you guys are doing a phenomenal job, all of them. It's so important. All the little discords and communities and playtest groups and people hosting events and players hosting events at stores and stores hosting events and people creating content and videos and podcasts and articles and tools and all that stuff. It's crazy how critical it is, and it's a lot of work. I know it's a lot of work, especially for people that aren't, fortunate enough like we are. This is what we're doing during the day, this is our job. So just kudos to everyone who keeps putting in those hard yards, because it is a ton of work. It's very little reward. As I've experienced, most people that love what you're doing don't say that much, and the people that really don't like what you're doing say the most. So it can be tough, right? But I do encourage everyone who's watching this who also creates content to keep doing it. It's really critical for this community in this game, and it's an amazing community. So shout out to everyone for doing that. If you're unfamiliar, teamcovenant.com, you can find out a lot more about us. We stream every Tuesday for Fabulous Tuesdays on our YouTube channel. And you can find us on all the relevant social media channels and whatnot. And if you're looking for somewhere to talk about the game, check out our Discord channel. And we'd love to have you. We have a really laid back and just enjoyable group of people hanging out on our Discord channel. And even our live chats for our streams, also just incredible people that make up our community, and we'd love to have you. And if you're ever in Tulsa and you're watching this, not in 2021, check in with us, see if we have our store open, and stop by and pay us a visit. I think you'll have a good time, and you'll be hopefully impressed. And again, thank you guys for having me on. And if you ever want me back, I'll be here.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I do want to mention that if you are in Tulsa or just around Tulsa around October 9th, that weekend there is a sealed event. So if you want to play against me or Zach, or just see us and say hi, Team Covenant is hosting an awesome sealed event to prepare you for the October calling. So I'm going to be there. Super excited, but get your practice in. But thank Zach. Thank you so much again for joining us, and for everyone that listened. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Zach.